Super.
All right, and then we can say start webinar. Let's get
Yep.
started.
And we're still need Eleanor here.
Recording. Eleanor's there. Hi, Eleanor.
Oh, she is. There she is. Yeah. Great.
Good afternoon.
Hi. Hi. Janice. Hi, Ted.
It's not.
Great. So we are just
It's not at all.
going to wait a minute or two for all of the attendees.
Do we have sound?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Can you hear us, Ed?
I can't hear. Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Unmute
probably-
yourself.
It turned off. The speakers turned off. No wonder. No, it's not what I need.
Okay. And Cheryl, I see that we have Tim Marciante here in the attendee list. So he's going to be our first guest here, and probably should just go ahead and promote him.
All right, and that he would be in the attendees,
Yeah, so he's in the
Yeah.
attendees.
and we'll promote you to a panelist. Hi, Tim.
Make sure that works. And then I think we can get going with starting the meeting. It's a rainy day.
I speak it off. And I forget that it's off. But having nothing to do with Zoom, it's just.
Yeah, let's see. I can't see you though. Are you there, Tim?
He's almost there. It's
Almost there.
setting it up there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting. This is a special meeting of the Needham Housing Authority Board of Commissioners. We're starting just a little after 12:30. Adequate notice of this meeting was provided by the Secretary of the Needham Housing Authority via public notice that was posted with the town clerk's office. And I also would just like to note for the record that this is a virtual meeting that's being conducted in accordance with the public meeting law, the changes that were implemented by Governor Healy a couple of years ago. So I'm going to start by calling the roll. Reg Foster is here. Eleanor, you're on mute, but it appears that you lip reading. You said you were here.
Ed Scheidler is here.
Penny Kirk here.
Janice Bennett here.
And we'll wait until Eleanor figures her microphone out here. Maybe Cheryl, you can send Eleanor a message asking her to unmute. He tried said, oh, says the host is, she says in her that you may have when you were trying to find the video buttons, you may have changed the setting for unmuting, so she can't unmute.
Is that
There
better?
she- Yeah.
Wow.
You got it.
Eleanor, are you here? Present. Oh, we still can't hear you.
Oh, no.
No, that must be on your end here.
Unmute. Let's see. Sorry, Eleanor. I have you unmuted on my end. There's no other option. You're unmuted. Let's see. Max, unmute. I think I put you on mute. Eleanor, can you hear us? Nope, still not.
I can hear you, but you don't think.
No, now we got you.
I can hear you.
Now
No,
we hear
okay.
you. Yeah, whatever you did there.
Can you hear us, Eleanor?
I can hear you.
Yep.
Great.
And we can
Okay.
hear you.
All right, I think we're ready to go.
And so Tim, we have to do the same thing, right, Tim?
Yeah.
Yep, I can
How's
you
that?
hear me now?
I
Yeah.
can hear
Yep.
you now.
Okay, perfect. Did you were you able to let Andrew in too? Because it looks like he said that he can hear everybody, but he's not sure
I
that they can hear him.
apologize for that.
So why don't you go ahead and promote him? We have one short agenda item before we get to you, Tim, so we'll go ahead with that.
No problem. I just want to make sure Andrew was able to join.
Thank you. All
Okay,
right,
I
so
think we got him.
starting with the agenda, there are no announcements from the chair. And the first agenda item is the review and approval of the fiscal year 2025 CPA funding application. So I believe everybody received a copy last week. And just wanted to check in to the board members and see if you have any comments and questions before we go to a vote.
No question.
No question.
No
Okay.
questions.
Okay, great.
I just have a question. So
Sure.
the document that I'm looking at is 3 pages long. Is that right? Is that
Yes.
the application itself, or is that just like a summary?
It's the
of it?
preliminary application. So the way it goes is they have a first step, which is, 100 words or less, supposedly, which is quite difficult to summarize a big project like this. And it's kind of in some respects, it's not fully necessary in that they already approved this last year, but the first formal step is for all the applications the CPC gets in. Let's say there are 10 applications altogether. They ask everybody to do this very short preliminary application, and then at the first meeting, the CPC considers whether the funding that's being requested meets the eligibility requirements of the Community Preservation Act. And then they notice us in December at their December meeting that it does. Usually it's by, sometime in early December. And then they usually follow up with a request for a very large amount of additional due diligence information on the project. So we've been working on that in parallel because we know what they would want to ask about. But this is just gets the ball rolling in the new application period leading up to possible hopeful approval at spring 2024 town meeting.
And given the questions or sort of the issues that we faced with them last year, do you think that I assume you think this preliminary application is sufficient, and that, if they have any issues that they would raise them more likely at the next stage?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is all just for them to confirm that it's, an eligible use of CPA funding, and they use that and have used it in the past to weed out sometimes applications that come in that don't meet the requirements for the CPA funding. So when we withdrew our application last year, it was for construction funding, and they were not, ruling against our application or anything like that. They thought it was premature for us to ask for construction funding before we had gotten the schematic design done and had a much better idea of what the zoning and all the other considerations need to be for the project.
Okay, thanks.
And I'll use your question just to say, there have been meetings with the planning board that some of you attended and all, I think everybody knows about. But I'll say it for this meeting here, since we are meeting public. And there will be, if we're going forward with this process, will be going forward with the planning board in a process to change the zoning for the 11 acres that we own there, so it would permit the kind of redevelopment that is being contemplated. And there's a whole public hearing process for that starts in December and continues in January, and then February, March with the select board, and eventually, if it all goes well, causes 2 zoning warrant articles to be proposed to town meeting. One is a map that says, here's the 11 acres that we're talking about. And the other one is the actual zoning district or zoning change language that is needed in order to enable, a project of that size and density to be constructed in that particular neighborhood. Any other questions? Hearing none, could I hear a motion to approve the fiscal year 2025 CPA funding application, which will be submitted by tomorrow to the CPC for consideration? This is a CPA funding application. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Eleanor, and do I have a second? Second by Penny Kirk. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we have to do roll call votes for virtual meetings. So Reg Foster votes aye.
Eleanor Evans votes aye.
Ed Scheidler votes aye.
Penny Kirk votes aye.
Janice Bennett votes aye.
Okay, and off to the races we go here. Great, thanks so much. Now, I'd like to introduce our guests for the next agenda item, which is that we have received the 2022 audit reports on the two entities that we have in right now. One is High Rock Homes LLC, and the second one is the Needham Housing Authority as a whole. And it often has been our custom to review those audit reports with our auditor once we receive them. Tim, would you please introduce yourself and Andrew and tell us a little bit about Marcom as well?
Absolutely. My name is Timothy Marchanti. I was a senior on the job, and this is Andrew Remus. He's a senior manager, and I'll let Andrew kind of take over from here so that he can kind of highlight the more important areas for you guys to focus on.
Yeah, I was going to say introduce not everybody who's attending this meeting by way of attending might know what Marcom is and what the scope of what you did. So if you could, not just for us, but in general, if you could introduce that.
Absolutely. So before I get into that, Cheryl, I don't think Andrew is able to unmute himself. Do you mind giving him that option? Perfect. Thank you. So Andrew can add on to what I'm saying. So essentially, Marcom, we're a CPA firm, and Andrew and I work in the affordable housing department, and we specialize in housing authority audits and audits of related entities such as High Rock Homes and other tax credits that that require audits. We've been specializing in this since Scott Hurley days, and we merged with Marcom back in 2018 or 19, I believe. And I think we do right around, I don't know, maybe 130 single housing authority audits. So we have quite the experience, and hopefully the feedback that we have will help you guys, make the improvements that you feel are necessary, and to kind of clean up the areas that we mentioned in the audit report. And I'll let Andrew kind of dive into any more information on that.
Great. I always find that 130 clients is the most impressive part of your introduction, because it's just mind-boggling to think of that many housing authorities, all at once. And these are large and small, right? It's not just the size of Needham. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. We have some very large clients all throughout New England. And, as we grow, we're continuing to try and get more housing authority clients throughout the United States. And it's a slow process getting our name out there as far as, the West Coast and the South. But Mike Guider's a great partner to have to lead our team. And he definitely is the tip of the spear trying to, get us more experience and everybody to get some exposure on some of those larger housing authorities throughout the United States. But there's definitely some very large ones in the Northeast that we do. And I'll let Andrew kind of explain more. So I'll turn it over to Andrew now.
Great. And
Yeah,
Andrew,
and-
let me also say, just for the public who are attending, that we received your High Rock Homes LLC audit sometime in mid-June, I believe. The final version was done, and it had some exceptions and some concerns noted. So it was right at that June board meeting that we decided that we absolutely did want to talk to you this year, but that we had put off having this meeting because the NHA audit was another month or two down the road, and so we wanted to be able to talk about both of them at the same time. But if we could start with the High Rock Homes one first, because that certainly caused some concerns on the part of the board.
Sure. And just quickly adding on to what Tim mentioned about the scope of our experience, even within that 130, there's this large and small ones, but we also have experience with PHAs undergoing various types of redevelopment activities, including those that have MTW designation from HUD.
That's
So-
great to know.
Quite the broad experience. I'm sure that we've seen just about every possible type of transaction.
Mhm.
So certainly helps from an audit perspective. So
Since we're going down that road, that's a great thing to mention, because we certainly would welcome any and all advice and counsel you have as we start down this road, because things can get very complicated, as you know.
yes, a lot of moving parts, and if you don't stay on top of it, it can create a nightmare. But I guess that's a topic for a different day, since today we're focused on the two audits that we recently completed, the one for High Rock Homes and then the one for Needham Housing as a whole. So and you want me to start with High Rock?
Yes, please.
So High Rock Homes is a single purpose entity created by Needham Housing to own and operate the property. And it is required to have a standalone audit because it's a separate legal entity and due to the regulatory agreements with MHFA. So our audit for High Rock covers an audit of the financial statements, and then also a compliance audit with the consolidated audit guide for HUD programs. So our opinion on the financial statements, so that's the numbers, was unmodified. That is to say, it was a clean audit opinion. However, we did identify some deficiencies in internal control over financial reporting and some compliance matters. So our internal control we identified a material weakness in internal controls over financial reporting. And a material weakness is defined as a deficiency or combination of deficiencies such that there is a reasonable possibility that a material misstatement will not be prevented or detected and corrected on a timely basis. And what we identified here was that there were inadequate segregation of duties related to the initiating and approving of transactions, as well as within the financial reporting system. I believe that you had used QuickBooks to account for High Rock. So related to those two matters, it's my understanding that historically High Rock was kind of treated as a separate entity from the regular system of internal controls for Needham, for the Housing Authority as a whole. So it wasn't subject to the same level of oversight and year-end reconciliations that the Housing Authority programs were. And in addition, we identified that several year-end adjusting entries related to High Rock Homes were not made until we were provided with the trial balance and the supporting schedules. So our recommendation to address this matter, so it's not recurring going forward, and I believe that you've started to do this already, is just to essentially incorporate High Rock Homes into the authority's monthly and annual closing process. So that it's covered by the same checks and reviews as the Section 8 program is, or the other state and local programs. Do you have any questions related to that matter before
I have some questions, but I wanted to ask Cheryl maybe to go next if you want to, Cheryl, in terms of your view on all of this.
Okay, Midge. I can certainly talk about the material weakness and the significant deficiency. Is that what you're hoping
Yes,
that I would
or
do?
anything that Andrew spoke to,
Yeah.
because you recently inherited everything.
I
Executive
inherited
directed
this.
in
Yeah.
March, although you were
Yeah.
there, for the year before that as assistant executive
Right.
director. So, but it's relatively new that you're, in the driver's seat here. So go ahead.
So as I said in a previous meeting, the audit report is more relevant to me now, more so than it's been in the past. As a commissioner, I 100% plus appreciate the work that Markham does. As I said also, that Tim is extremely responsive to me. Any questions that I have on the audit, he has been immediately available to talk with me about them and getting me to a point of thorough understanding. And with this audit, I had spent a great deal of time with Tim on the phone, myself and Tammy Ganai, just so that we understand exactly what our response will be to the audit. And it's been very clear with Tim's help. It's an excellent record of our financial condition. I have nothing but praise to say for this document. It's just very well put together. And as I said, Tim has been extremely responsive to me, and I understand more clearly what our role is as an authority in terms of, the financial conditions of the agency. The material weaknesses, I've, as you know, hired a financial specialist, and we are going through those issues that came up in material weakness. And we're addressing the bulleted items that have come about. And we're making good progress on that. I think, Andrew, I may have been a little distracted, but as you mentioned on the other two findings, significant deficiency, those were a result of a previous audit that has been corrected. So I think that's all I have to offer, unless there are any questions.
I think in board members, does anybody have any questions or comments on the High Rock audit? And then we'll go to the Needham Housing Authority one when we're done.
So I guess I have a question. So Cheryl, once you work through what changes will be implemented as a result of this, these findings, then do you anticipate that any, will you report back to the board, and will there be any kind of board approval needed for revising policies or anything like that?
So far, we haven't actually identified a policy that would need to be created as a result of the material weakness findings. We have initiated a process of segregation of duties, segregation of duties and depreciation of expenses for the year, prior year adjusting entries, adequate segregation of duties within the financial reporting system. These things we have already initiated, if you will, a process to do this. again, there's a mention about a tenant security deposit that was deposited into the operating account rather than properly deposited into a separate tenant security deposit cash account, but that has been corrected. We may need to, although what happens with doubtful accounts, we don't actually have a specific policy on that. It has been brought to your attention in terms of addressing those accounts, but I think it might be a good idea for us to just have a policy on how we deal with doubtful accounts. Yeah. Tammy is extremely helpful to me. And again, this for me is, you know, for lack of a better adjective, a good roadmap for me to follow for the year as we go forward to make sure that, you know, these procedures are in place. It's a very, very good report. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Penny, Ed, do you have any questions? Janice?
No,
I've got a couple here. Just back to you, Andrew, or Cheryl, you can chime in. The inadequate separation of powers, that's something that's come up every 2 or 3 years, because we're so small. It's, you know, it's hard. It's sometimes difficult to create that enough of a separation to. But have we now been able to address that to your satisfaction, to Markham's satisfaction, or Andrew or Tim or Cheryl? I mean, has that been fixed?
I'll refrain from giving a definitive yes or no until we look at next year's audit.
Mhm.
So I don't want to speak to something that I don't have a definitive answer. But from the steps that Cheryl has outlined, it seems like you've taken steps to address the matter sufficiently.
And was this a separation, you know, person A incurs
believe it was-
expense and person B then who's separate from that person approves it for payment? Is that that kind of thing?
Yeah, and with High Rock being like treated as kind of separate, it didn't fall under the same approval process that, you know, the regular NHA payments were. So transitioning High Rock to follow the same processes should address that matter.
Well, I'll go to Cheryl then, because Andrew actually gave the right, you know, the auditor's answer to the question. Do you feel like you've been able to separate out person A from person B in the areas that of concern that Markham found?
Yes, so I actually, a purchase order system was started in 2022. However, what I've changed was that we would encumber the purchase order before the invoice. So I'm training the staff to actually requisition a purchase order, make a purchase of the item, requisition a purchase order, I apologize, create the purchase order and then place the order. And then once the order comes in, they would then notify us that the order has been received. It would then be forwarded to the bookkeeper. I also will process that invoice that it's okay to pay. So I've actually looked at the invoice, approved the invoice to be charged to the account that it needs to be charged to, and write okay to pay and date on that. So that's just a small example of segregation of duties. But that is working well so that not one person is approving invoices and paying them.
Great. My next question had to do with Andrew's QuickBooks remarks. We've been trying to transition from QuickBooks. It's an idea that's been around for a while, and I think we have transitioned to PHA Web. Are we still using QuickBooks for High Rock Homes accounting, or has that been transitioned as well?
No, we are using PHA Web for
Yeah,
High Rock Homes accounting.
so we're out of the QuickBooks business altogether.
We are
this-
out of the QuickBooks business.
Well, that's great. It's a big pain to switch over, I know, and
Was
that's
a-
great that that's happened. Takes a lot of work. So the year-end adjusting entries made late. I understand that your recommendation, Andrew, to incorporate HRH into the regular monthly and quarterly closing process. I won't ask you this question then. Have we done that, Cheryl? You know, are we now doing that?
We are now doing that with our fee accountants that come in monthly.
Great. All right. Back to Andrew and Tim. So I just have the letter, the June 16th letter that you sent us in front of me here, and I'm just gonna you identified in section 2 significant risks of material misstatement as part of our audit planning, management override of controls, and improper revenue recognition. Not sure you spoke specifically to those bullets just now.
Or first, Cheryl, do you mind unmuting Tim? I think if we mute ourselves, that we don't have
Sorry,
the ability
Tim.
to unmute. And
There's a setting in the bottom right under the attendee participant screen that you can, where it says allow panelists to unmute
Tim,
themselves.
can you hear me?
I can, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure that I could speak in case
Sorry
anybody.
about that.
No problem. Andrew, you can keep going.
yeah, so those two matters that you identified in our governance communication letter, I believe effective in 2021, we were required to adopt a series of new auditing standards, one of which covered requiring us to communicate to those charged with governance what we believe the most significant risks of misstatement are. So the two matters identified the management override that is inherent in every single audit. It represents the risk that management could bypass controls. So the focus here is really on the potential for misstatement, not whether something occurred. And then the second is improper revenue recognition. And this is inherent in, I would say, every audit that has a significant revenue source. And it's essentially that management could misstate revenue to make the results of operations look better.
That latter one sounds like more of a sort of private sector concern when you're actually, doing a P&L than it would be for a public sector entity.
It is more prevalent in the private sector with the auditing standards. It's a high bar to clear to say that it's not a significant risk.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of more so a default to calling it a significant risk just due to the nature of the account.
I know your letters are very carefully worded. Every single word and punctuation mark is, carefully thought through. But when I misread that particular section of the letter, because of the way it was worded, to mean that you had in fact identified specific exceptions, and you're saying, I hear you now saying, no, it's this. If I were rephrasing this in the way I was understanding, but not trying to put words in your mouth, it should say we've identified the following theoretical significant risks of material misstatement on part of our audit planning, but not any specific examples where it actually we foot faulted something.
That is correct. It's a focus on the potential of what could go wrong versus what we actually found.
Great. Well, those are my questions. If nobody in the board has any other questions, let's move on to the NHA side. And is there anything that you would like to bring to that was a fairly clean letter in my reading the large amount of fine print that is in the letter here, but is there anything that you would like to draw to our attention?
Nothing really specific, or except that in this case, the opinion on the financial statements was qualified. And this was due to the reporting from the retirement system not being available timely. We were provided with a draft of the necessary pension report, but from our audit perspective, we can't rely on a draft for
Right.
sufficient audit evidence. So the numbers in there are most likely correct. We just didn't have the final audit.
Yeah, that comes from somebody else, not from our staff, right? Yeah.
Right, it's kind of outside the scope of the authority staff. It's kind of our hands are tied essentially, that because the report wasn't final, we can't say that we had sufficient audit evidence.
Mhm. Mhm.
Can I just ask a question about that? Is that something that happens every year because of the timing of things, or was that something unique to this year?
So that was new this year. It's I would say with Massachusetts PHAs in general, it's a recurring problem that we encounter, given that the authority and the city could have different fiscal year ends. So like the city's fiscal year end is June 30. So their audit wouldn't be due until March, but you're a calendar year. So yours is going to be due 6 months sooner. So that can create problems with the timeline of when the audit for the retirement system is completed.
It's interesting to me, are we on a calendar fiscal year? Because, I mean, it's interesting to me that we're on a calendar fiscal year in that it seems like entities that got government funds are either on a June 30th or a September 30th year end.
I would say from our experience with our PHA client base, it's fairly split evenly between the 4 quarters.
Okay.
I don't know what went into the original decision to pick a fiscal year, but
That's lost in the midst of time, I suspect.
yeah, it would go back decades.
We're 75 years old this year. You know that, right? We just did a birthday party. So any other questions from the commissioners?
I have a question that's not about the audit report per se, but just to refer to like 4 million in debt that the housing authority has. And I was just curious what that debt is.
So that debt is going to be a combination of the loans on High Rock Homes. And when this year you were also required to adopt GASB 87, which covered lease agreements.
Mhm.
And since the authority is leasing office space,
Mm,
this agreement required you to recognize an asset for the right to use that office space for the lease term, which is offset by a lease liability, which is included in that debt amount.
got it.
Any other questions? We've got a couple. And then this is really by way of closing. Is there anything else about the High Rock Homes or the NHA 22 audits that we should be asking you about, but we just don't know enough to be able to pose the question to you?
I don't think so. Your questions so far have been probably, I would say, better than what I've gotten from most commissioners. I think
Thank you.
the level of detail and what you're actually asking. So there's nothing that comes to mind.
Great. Well, thank you. And then the second question, you may not want to fully express an opinion, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Our fee accountant, is represented for several years to us, and usually it's around our 2020, our annual budget cycle, when we sit there and go through what is being proposed for the upcoming year, which is about to happen in a month or so. Of this, and I don't know how, I think it's about 70 PHAs, LHAs that he does fee accounting for. We're in relatively good shape. You know, we're sort of in the fifth percentile in terms of having, a decent, relatively speaking, of course, but a decent balance sheet, reserves, etc. I'll try to ask it in a way maybe you can, is there any reason to be concerned about what the fee accountant has been representing to us here?
I would say there's nothing. And if you do want to look at it, look at your 2022 financial statements, and you'll see that where, like, for your financial position, you have this number that's reported as unrestricted net position. Which
Yes,
is essentially your unrestricted equity that's not tied up in capital assets or
right.
for a specific HUD purpose.
Not liquid or something. Yeah, right.
And it's a positive number,
Mhm.
which that amount includes the pension and OPEB liabilities factored in.
Mhm.
Generally speaking, most PHAs that have those long-term payroll related liabilities, that unrestricted net position is actually a deficit.
Interesting.
Being close to zero or a positive number is a good thing.
Great. That's that's a metric I've never thought to look at. Has that been now I'm going to want to look at it over the last few years. Has that been generally our situation? Do you know?
I
Last
just
few
have
years?
2021 here, and last year it was a deficit
Mhm.
of 130,000.
Yeah.
But that would include the, I don't know, $2 million in long-term payroll related liabilities that you're just really funding on a go forward basis. This is not something that will be required to fully fund next year type deal.
Can I, can I subtract out of that unrestricted assets number that you referenced, subtract out the OPEB and what else, and then you kind of get a real number?
Yeah, if you subtract out the OPEB and the pension,
Yeah.
it kind of gives a more realistic number on what your essentially liquid, unrestricted equity position would be.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Great. Last question. We do have our 2024 budget process kicking off this fall. And, we have our annual meeting in early December to go through everything. Is there anything that you would recommend that we pay attention to on that budget cycle that, that either the board or Cheryl doesn't already know about here?
Nothing specific.
Okay.
I have another question. Could you describe how the how like the degree of cooperation and assistance you receive from management in conducting the audit, and whether there are concerns that the board should be aware of there?
Yeah, of course, Andrew can elaborate, but I worked very closely with being that I was the senior on the job, I was the one that went out there and worked with Cheryl and her staff. And I can say Cheryl and her staff were very responsive and very helpful. They prepared everything that we needed. And there were a handful of follow-up requests that we had after we left the field. Once we started to dig deeper into everything, and they were great with getting us back what we needed. Other than that, I mean, it was just a lot of back and forth, only because we came across stuff and we had some questions here and there as it went through the review process. But yeah, I would say, I didn't have any complaints about management at all. I think they were very, very helpful and, got us what we need, and we were able to complete the audit timely. So that's the biggest goal, is just trying to make sure that it gets done timely so that there's no issues with HUD.
And then does it get uploaded to the audit clearinghouse?
Yes.
Well, that's super great. Thank you for saying that. Congratulations, Cheryl, because, times of transition between executive directors, I can personally testify, and so can probably Penny, sometimes there's, it's difficult to have continuity of, oversight. So well done. Anything you want to close with, Cheryl, at all?
Thank you for that, Reg. And then, as I said, the report really is my roadmap. So, I just need to keep that in mind for next year's audit as we move forward. It's very helpful to me as a new executive director and, helping me to reach my learning curve.
Well, I always like to say, if you give it a try and read through the notes, even though sometimes it might put you to sleep, but if you read through all the notes in both of these reports, you find out everything you ever wanted to know
Exactly.
about both our agency and then High Rock Homes LLC.
It's a very good report.
Yeah, it's got a lot of good information in it here. So
Very
great.
good.
I think we are done. Thank you very much to Tim and Andrew for coming. And I think we're at the end of our agenda. So motion to adjourn from somebody.
So just,
Second.
we don't vote to accept the audit report.
We haven't typically done that. No. Should we? I don't know. I typically haven't seen that in not only the housing authority, but the nonprofit or other nonprofit organizations or, that I've served on. But is that something you practice in this area? Do you think that's a good idea to do?
I mean, I've seen nonprofits do it, but I don't know. I'd be curious to know from Tim and Andrew, what do you see with your clients?
I've personally seen housing authorities formally accept the audit report. Some do, some don't. Andrew, what's your experience with that?
Yeah, it's fairly mixed and whether they formally accept it or not.
I mean, I don't see any harm in doing it. I tend to think it shows that we document, obviously we have the minutes showing that we, met with the auditors, but I think that accepting it can, document that we looked at it and reviewed it and had our questions answered. So I guess I'm thinking that it does.
So I would defer to you, Eleanor, because you practice 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in this area, as well as Andrew and Tim. If that's a recommendation, I'm fine with it. How do the other board members feel?
Sure, why not?
If that's a best practice that we can adopt, better late than never, I guess, so. Okay, so Eleanor, I believe you have a motion.
Yes. So I guess I do it in two separate votes. So I move that we accept the auditor's report sorry, I took it off my screen, but for is it 2023? 2022. 2022. Yeah, as presented.
Which one are we doing?
So NHA.
Needham Housing Authority 2022 audit as reviewed. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Janice. Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Reg Foster votes aye.
Eleanor Evans votes aye.
Ed Scheidler votes aye.
Penny Kirk votes aye.
Janice Bennett votes aye.
It's unanimous. And then do I have a second motion, Eleanor?
Yeah, I move that we accept the fiscal year 2022 audit report for High Rock Homes as presented.
Second.
And who would second it? Janice. And any discussion? In hearing none, call the vote. Reg Foster votes aye.
Eleanor Evans votes aye.
Ed Scheidler votes aye.
Penny Kirk, aye.
Janice Bennett votes aye.
And that's carries unanimously as well. And so now I will ask for a motion to adjourn
Motion to adjourn.
from Janice
Second.
Bennett and second from Penny Kirk. Hearing no discussion, Reg Foster votes aye.
Eleanor Evans votes aye.
Ed Scheidler votes aye.
Penny Kirk, aye.
Janice Bennett votes aye.
Thank you, gentlemen. That was a very interesting and informative presentation.
Of course, our pleasure.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for having us.
Thank
All
you.
right. I guess we'll see you next year.
Yeah. Would you like any hard copies mailed out, Reg or Cheryl? Does the board want any hard copies of the audit, either of them?
I would like a hard copy of I think I have the HRH one already, but
Okay.
it's very handy to have the hard copy
Yes.
as well as the soft copy. So if we can just make that a regular practice.
Yeah,
that would-
And Tim, if you could send me 2 of the High Rock and 1 of the NHA, that would be great.
yep, absolutely. I'll put in that request today.
Okay.
Right. Have a nice day, everybody.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Nice to
Bye-bye.
meet you, Tim and Andrew.
Thank you.